So this is David Wolfe. I'm the director of the manufacturing services at Applied Software. Kaleb, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Kaleb Flowers. I am the plant implementation specialist, and I also do a little bit with Recap and Navisworks. Owen?
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Owen Whitehouse, Senior Application Specialist with Applied. I've been working in plant and P&ID for a time frame that's scary to say, measured in decades. And hopefully we can answer any questions and build on those questions to help put together a plan for 2020 to help us get you where you want to be with plant and P&ID.
Very good. Thank you. All right. So the first question is, what is preventing you from using AutoCAD P&ID successfully? And so go ahead and feel free. This is really all about you guys. You've responded kind of around that you're still doing plain AutoCAD. If you guys have any questions about what the program looks like, we'd love to hear from you in the chat window. So feel free to go ahead and chat. Kaylee, you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen as far as implementing P&ID?
Sure. So it seems like there's a lot of backlog as far as people having just regular P&IDs in AutoCAD as opposed to having them in Plant 3D. And that really, they can be transferred over to, I guess you can call it, let's call them intelligent P&IDs. You could transfer them over to that, but it could take a significant amount of time. However, you can connect these as far as within the drawing, you can make all these drawings connect together. So there won't be quite the intelligent of using Plant 3D, but you can still have them so the information lines up, just so you're not losing essentially everything you had before. And then typically people will just kind of continue on from now on using the smart P&IDs.
Okay, thank you. Owen, any comments on P&ID adoption and what some of the pain points are between that prevent people from moving forward into intelligent P&IDs?
No, honestly, I think the biggest stumbling point for intelligent P&ID adoption is just a lack of understanding on what the benefits are and how easy it is. People have a high level of familiarity and comfort with using standard AutoCAD block-based P&IDs, and they're intimidated by the idea of going to an intelligent P&ID system. So I think it's important that as we go forward and with new customers and even existing customers who still have their content on their P&IDs in the traditional AutoCAD DWG format, we show them that not only is the tool pretty easy to set up and get going with, but you can actually work on your P&IDs much more quickly and much more efficiently. So there's a learning curve for sure, but there's a tremendous amount of benefit to be had from going through that process. And unfortunately, I think that adoption level is still pretty low, and we'd like to really, figure out what we can do to improve that. So if you have a question about it, go ahead and put it into the Q&A window.
Sure. Yeah, I see a few people on right now. JJ or Gary, if you guys have any questions around AutoCAD P&IDs, feel free to let us know and just pop them in the Q&A chat window there. I will say, so my journey into intelligent P&IDs, I started doing piping design, I think it was 2006. And so I was working for a company, Fagan Engineering, that did a lot of ethanol and biodiesel stuff. And we were doing all regular AutoCAD P&IDs, AutoCAD-based P&IDs. And we did a lot of like OSBL work, so tank farm stuff, pipe racks, that sort of thing. We did construction design for that. And one of my jobs as a designer was to go through and kind of look at the P&IDs and I started learning how to use AutoCAD and became a lot more familiar with it. And then fairly early into the process, I was given a bunch of P&IDs These were more things that were done inside the process building. So I was handed a set of PNIDs, and they said, let's do a takeoff. And you need to count all the valves, let us know what types they are. And then we also need all the instruments. And so I think it was 40 of them, PDFs, went through and started doing it in Excel and tracking everything. And, it took a while. And I basically said to myself, I don't ever want to do this again. And started doing optimization with that process around the data extraction from AutoCAD attributes. And then it got to a point where it pretty much, like, there's a limit to what you can do, because like I'd work for, let's say, 4 hours, come up with this report. I was like, the project manager is going to love this. It's going to be done, good to go. And then he's like, oh yeah, that's great. Now can I see the valves by line number? It was like, I'll be back in a week. That type of thing.
How about those changes that you haven't incorporated yet? And can you rerun this report for us, even though you did it manually?
Yes. And so pretty quickly, it came to the point where to modify all those attributes, you'd have to go reinsert them, redefine them all, and it's not sustainable, really, if you're trying to get a lot of different types of information out. So that's when I first started looking into intelligent PNIDs, and I first heard the word database using CADWorks. And so from that point on, I think it took me, like, after reading the word database, that scared me off for like a month or something, because I had no clue what it was. And then I started playing with it, and it's less scary than it sounds. I know a lot of people are intimidated by that word, but especially with AutoCAD PNID, I think it's hidden a lot because the tool just provides a lot more access to what you want to get.
To kind of speak to the amount of time consumed spending, just trying to redo drawings, trying to create drawings. Back whenever I first started using Smart PNIDs in, I think, 2013, I'm going to say. But I mean, as far as training, there wasn't much out there. So it took quite a while. I think we spent about 6 months on 50 PNIDs, and we were still kind of trying to figure out what was going on. So a lot has changed. There's so much more information now as far as teaching and things like that, kind of getting to where you can use these tools comfortably.
Yeah. So we got some feedback from Gary. He's using Inventor and is trying to get kind of up to speed maybe on the 3D AutoCAD stuff. Gary, are you doing any PNIDs, any schematics? I think that's kind of a hard thing to do inside of Inventor. Hopefully my speaking doesn't outspeed his typing. It can be difficult to keep up with people on the chat. But if you can just give us some feedback around maybe what you're doing in PNIDs, we can talk through that. We're going to get through to the Plant 3D part a little bit later. So hopefully we can help kind of provide some perspective on that.
Yeah, well, Gary gets his additional information and question typed out. I was going to go back to that conversation around doing takeoffs on PNIDs. Back when I first started working on PNIDs and they were unintelligent, we had several members of our purchasing team that their entire world existed around yellow legal pads and a set of highlighter markers in various colors. And every time a revision to a PNID came out, they had to sit down and highlight all the valves or instruments or anything they needed to get a material list off of the PNID from. Mm-hmm. And these people had to sit there for days going over these drawings and building a list, writing it all down on the legal pad, and then transferring it into Excel to do a top up. And unfortunately, I think that's still a very real workflow in a lot of places where those material orders, those early long lead items, large bore valves and things like that, definitely are still being taken off manually. And
it really is
one of the things that AutoCAD PNID just instantly makes go away.
Yes. Yeah, I guess jumping back to Kaleb's train of thought on how easy it is to edit, that is another thing. With AutoCAD, the line work, you're doing all the trims, you're doing stretching all the time, you're moving things. And what, like, I think you touched on a little bit, Kaleb, but it's very easy. Like in AutoCAD P&ID, you still use copy, you still use paste. There's just more data stuff behind it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you know how to use AutoCAD, you can jump right into this. It's so intuitive.
Very good. Well, should we go ahead and jump over to the next slide and start talking about the 3D content? No one said no, so I went ahead and switched.
Go ahead.
You're welcome. So survey question is, does Plant 3D have the content you need? So if you have any input, feel free to go ahead and enter that into the chat. If you have not answered the survey question, we'd love to hear from you. We know that some industries don't necessarily have everything because Autodesk has kind of rolled this out over the years, and so they kind of pick the content they create, but we'd love to hear from you. Ralph, I see you. It looks like our chat thing is different from our attendee list. Are you guys seeing this? I saw Ralph chime in with sure.
Oh, hit your refresh button.
Oh, yeah. There's a refresh button in there. Oh, there's a lot more people. There we go. Very good. Ralph, good to see you. I know I see you on LinkedIn sometimes. Thanks for joining us. I guess a little bit of coverage back from Gary's questions about 3D AutoCAD. Owen, you want to kind of talk about 3D AutoCAD and how its approach would differ from Inventor? And then kind of what Plant 3D adds on top of that?
Sure. I think, if you have any familiarity or comfort with Inventor in the design environment, you know that everything in Inventor is based on that model tree. So it's a tree-based, it's a history-based modeler. And, the actual operations of modeling components in Inventor, of course, you start with a sketch and then you move from the sketch into, maybe an extruded solid. And then it's actually a component that lives in the model tree. So that workflow is dramatically different than AutoCAD, which is, it has no content management of that kind whatsoever. There's no history. As far back as you can hit the undo key, that's all you get. And if you close the session and restart it, then that's gone. But as far as all your 3D operations, drawing shapes and lines and all that, it's pretty much the same. So just that's the real big difference is, in Inventor, you can grab that slider and basically go back in time and, take a look at the model the way it used to be. And then, but then if you think about from the standpoint of blocks and content, of course, Inventor uses iParts that have a lot of intelligence and parametrics built in. And that, that feature set exists in AutoCAD. It's a little bit different. It's, parametric blocks, but you can do a lot of the same stuff with the exception, of course, with Inventor, you get the ability to connect to, an external data source for the parametric values. So if you've designed an iPart and you have a spreadsheet somewhere external to the application, you can link to those values and basically build a parts library just from Excel. So but then, the focus is different. You're talking about manufacturing, you're talking about the ability to store material surface finishes and things like that. And so when you get into a really, really big design, of course, Inventor just isn't able to handle it. I've tried. I've done some pretty extensive, pipe modeling in Inventor, and it works pretty well as long as you don't try to do too much. It'll really tax your system, and that's where AutoCAD really shines, is the ability to display and work within a very substantial design project and really not slow down much at all. You can, as long as your system's pretty capable, you can rotate the whole model and zoom in and out, and you're not waiting, which you can't really say with a very large inventor model.
Yeah. So I guess kind of couple things on top of that. So I would consider like the UCS inside of AutoCAD to be almost equivalent to the sketch plane in the sense that because AutoCAD still limits you to draw an X and Y, you have to basically move that UCS wherever you want to draw or model stuff. And so like it's not persistent, meaning like you can create and save a UCS, but like a sketch plane, that's what you're really working with every single object. Whereas with AutoCAD, you just set your plane where you want to model things, and you can just model up from there wherever you want to with relation to that origin. So what Plan 3D does is it lets us, instead of like AutoCAD, basically it's like an open modeler where you just do whatever shapes you want. Plan 3D gives us the geometries and definitions around what a flange is, what a pipe is. So for Inventor, you already have those things if you're using Content Center, but in AutoCAD, we don't have that. So Plant 3D is our content center for process piping. And there are just a quick aside on the, for Gary, if you have your machine in Inventor, then there is an import command inside of AutoCAD that will let you bring in an Inventor file. So you would just type in import and then browse and select your Inventor file, and then you can bring that in, assuming that your computer can handle that conversion process, like it has enough performance to do that. But you can just bring in your file directly over, and you would have it inside of AutoCAD as a DWG format. So Kaleb, you've done some spec work. What kind of things have you run into around the Plant 3D content, like shifting gears over to the content itself for Plant 3D?
Well, I've done a lot of work with, a little bit of work, let's say that, with a few different, I guess you could say, industries. So going to like the food industry, food side of things, there seems to not be too much in food handling, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. That's something that, I believe there are plugins out there. The Autodesk actually has an app store that you can go in and you can find some plugins, but there seems to not be too terribly much behind that aside from just standard piping. For facilities, it's fairly extensive. There's a lot of parts, a lot of specs, a lot of pieces and parts that you can put together to build your facility that I would say is fairly conclusive, has as much as you need. But yeah, there's definitely are some things that you kind of have to go in and build yourself, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, I think like one of the things is pretty common to build with like steam traps.
Yeah, steam traps, some specialty items, things like hoses, possibly. Those don't really show up to instruments. Yes, your actuators on some things. There are a handful of actuators, but whenever you start getting into like specialty actuators, then it kind of, that's usually manufacturer specific anyway. So you have to kind of go find what matches your application best.
Sure. Ralph, thanks for the comments. Yes, like Ralph had mentioned in the chat, a lot of times we'll see people doing design of machine parts or equipment in Inventor, and then we can transfer those into CAD to actually show how they're connected up, how they're piped up, where they sit within the facility. And so that's a pretty common practice. And then we usually use Navisworks to bring it all together. I think almost every piper has a copy of Navisworks open all the time when they're routing pipe, along with Plant 3D. That's kind of an aside.
It's a great way to justify that third screen.
Yeah, because we always need more screens.
Exactly.
All the time. Let's see. We do have, Owen, I think you've done a lot of stuff with ERP and catalog type integration. What are some things that have to be considered if you would want to use some of those with Plant 3D or integrate with ERP and with Plant 3D? Hopefully I'm not throwing you under the bus here.
No, that's actually a great topic. It's one of the things that as you work with larger companies and larger clients, or even if you're acting as a sub for for one of the bigger engineering firms or companies, you often are handed some requirements around putting a parts numbering system or using an existing parts library. And I won't say that that's easy to do in any system, because those are big complicated libraries of numbers, and you have to figure out a way to get those into your Plant 3D spec. But as long as you can have a fairly well-defined system of numbering, if it's not all just a random number, it's really easy to just dump your content out from Plant 3D via the spec editor into an Excel file, and transfer those numbers into your spreadsheet, and then bring it back into Plant.
I'll go ahead and, sorry to jump in, I'll go ahead and take Brian's question, which is, what do you see as the biggest issue or challenge with Plant 3D specs versus CADWorks specs? So the biggest challenge really that people still try to use CADWorks, That was a joke. No one's laughing. It fell flat.
I couldn't hit unmute fast enough. Whenever I go through and teach classes, just the simplest, hey, CADWorks doesn't really offer the P&ID side of things like Plant 3D does. And then they're like, okay, well, we can do just regular P&IDs. And then you start talking about the capabilities, and they're like, oh, wow, that's much better. That's much easier. That saves so much more time. So just on that end, it's so much better.
Yeah. Let's see. Ralph is asking for database/table driven specs. I assume they're talking about scheduling and materials filling in the model while you route. Is that your take on that, Owen? Is that probably what they're asking about?
Yeah, I think that's probably the one that comes up the most frequently, is just the differences in how CADWorks specs handle wall thicknesses and materials and schedule, as opposed to how Plant 3D does it. And they're just slightly different methodologies that get you to the same end. Mm-hmm. It's not to say Plant 3D can't do it. It does it in a different way.
Right. It would be nice. I know a lot of people use the keyword concept inside of CADWorks, and that's transitioned over some into I call it next gen, but when I last used it, it was 2012. So it's old now. It's old news now. But that would be nice to have inside of Plant 3D. And we've talked about doing a plugin around that. We've actually done some custom coding for clients to move stuff around and move spec properties around and things like that.
Well, and I think that's really kind of the heart of this webinar today, is to try to take the temperature of the room, basically, and figure out for our next efforts in 2020, is it pretty universally held that everyone would like a better way to interact with wall thicknesses and materials and schedules inside of the Plant 3D spec engine? And if so, what would that look like? So again, throw your comments into the Q&As, so we can talk about it and at least understand your needs. That's really what this build a webinar is all about, is soliciting feedback from the users, and hopefully we can use that to inform our next activities throughout this coming year.
Yeah, so Ralph's comment was he wants one spec that could be copied to make a bunch. So have you used the long description styles at all? That's the closest thing I can think of right now, is long description styles inside of Plant 3D, where you could set up some style definitions And as long as you build your catalogs correctly, then you can populate and build specs on the fly with the correct component descriptions. So that's probably something we need to review a little bit more in depth in a future webinar or something, because there are some challenges with it. A lot of times people want to see, let's say, like on a reducer that changes schedule, they want to see the main by reducing schedule. Okay. So yeah, I'm just checking out Ralph's comment. Looks like most of it's just around what can we do to make the spec process faster. I guess what would help was, can someone, or if you guys want to contribute to this conversation, if you want to just put in how much time you guys spend in a project, like doing specs. If you have a 4-week project, would you spend 2 days, 3 days? If you have a 4-month project, is it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? That would be helpful for us to kind of gauge the level of your pain points. And yes, we do have resources on the long description styles. We'll have to dig those up, and we'll do a blog article about it. Kaleb,
one thing that's
real quick.
Go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, Kaleb, take a note real quick about the long description styles topic, and we'll touch base later.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So another thing that I ran into a lot as I darkened clients' doors over the past few years is a very much increased requirement these days for realistic depictions of components, especially like valves and valve actuators. Even down into small bore stuff, we were starting to see a lot of companies that were desperate to have those representations look more realistic. So I was just curious what the take of the attendees that are on being able to show more realistic representations of valves and valve bodies.
Yeah, that's a great question. Ralph, thanks for that comment. You think about 5% of project for admin and spec building? That's a good rule of thumb to be informed of. This is an entertaining chat window. We have humor here, folks. Owen has never darkened a door.
Oh, that's Brian. He and I go way back.
Yep, very good. Well, hopefully this horse is dead and we can stop beating it. Let's go on to the next slide, which I kind of think maybe we've already started touching on some of these. Around what are the problems that you're experiencing. We've already started talking about specs and how people would like them to be more versatile, like CADWorks. The double line pipe ortho for congestion drawings. Yeah, that's I know that's been on the wish list for a while. Probably as soon as they came out with the ortho engine, people probably wanted single line piping. Integration around that for other disciplines.
Well, that brings up a good question. So integration with design tools. I'm kind of curious for specifics on that one. What exact design tools those might be. So if anyone out there in the webinar has got a specific integration they're looking for, a specific workflow they're looking for, go ahead and type that into the Q&A so we can start discussing it, or maybe make it a subject of a future webinar.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We do have, there's a company that's been around a while, SCADA Systems. They have a product called Electes that I've seen people use over the years. We have a informal partnership with them right now, but they do provide AutoCAD-based tools for electrical and instrumentation and controls. I think we would all like the structural integration to be tighter, but advanced steel does a lot of that, takes care of a lot of those, and then takes it further than Plant 3D would with the fabrication drawings for structural stuff. So that's what we look at for there, because it'll all still be DWG based, so you can load it up in XREFs. Okay, any other comments on the pain points?
No, I think
Owen, did I interrupt you?
I was just looking at Ralph's comment about spec limitations in P3D, and I would be curious if how we could approach that from the standpoint of maybe a foot race, or just a challenge to say, let's quantify this. If the consensus is that modifying a spec in CADWorks is faster and easier than it is in P3D, is that just a function of the user having had a lot of time and familiarity with CADWorks versus the P3D engine, or is it really a limitation of the tool? So I would be curious to do that in a future webinar, maybe have someone who's very familiar with configuring a spec, and we can face off against each other, run CADWorks versus the CADWorks workflow versus the P3D workflow, and just see.
Yeah, I think I mean, I agree. It'd be good to see that in a foot race. But I mean, it's going to come down to, like, for Plant 3D, you're going to invest some more time in your catalogs, probably just getting your properties filled out, and then using long description styles. And then CADWorks, they have other tools to generate the descriptions. Let's see, I'm trying to read through this chat window. We have some questions about nozzle continuations for isometrics. Ralph, I'm not sure what you're kind of referring to on the isometrics question.
I think I understand that one. It's when you run an ISO for piping that's connected to a piece of equipment, it's very nice in that isometric to see a bubble annotating what piece of equipment that pipe is connected up to. And so the nozzle that you're connecting to on the equipment needs to have some intelligence that passes through at the time of the ISO run to display, this is the pump suction for P203.
Right. Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that's all that is done in the ISO config style. So you can add whatever properties you want. You can add the equipment tag, you could add the nozzle pressure, size, any nozzle property really. So hopefully that's what he's looking for. But the data and everything that you need is there. It's just configuring an ISO style to display what you want to see. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, as far as the isometrics are concerned, P3D does handle that very differently. It's a lot of XML configuration, which, if you're familiar with the legacy configuration of Isogen in the past, that was not fun. And then Isogen has been moved on to a new, more user-friendly interface. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's great, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. But the ISO generation in AutoCAD is it's an entirely different tool at this point. So configurations are different. The operations, and, you know, where you look for the settings is very different. So that is a steep learning curve. It takes some time to understand where to look to find the setting you want. But at the end of the day, I think, especially when you have some expert help on your side, really it does a fine job.
It does. It's so flexible. I went into one client and I was shocked to see that they had managed to, what was it? I think they had multiple weld tables, multiple column weld tables getting filled out. I forget exactly what it was, but I was like, I didn't even know you could do that, but it's all around their configuration, their ISO config. And it's been getting faster. There's a lot more control over how much time you want it to take to try to make things lay out cleaner versus other tools like that. They've been doing things, I know, like having in the reference dimensions now is not a big deal anymore because everyone can do it, but it's nice to have those in there. So it's been a lot to dig into on the isometrics engine. And I guess just a couple notes. There is I wrote a book for Autodesk a while ago called Demystifying AutoCAD Isometrics, and it's a reference manual, so it covers all the parts of the ISO config, but there's so much there that, you know, it doesn't cover every possible configuration option that you can do, but it kind of covers out the structure and what it's done, what it does. So definitely take a look for that. It's called Demystifying AutoCAD Isometrics. Then there's also a manual we use that's I wrote for Autodesk called Tailoring AutoCAD P&ID in Plant 3D. So that again is like a guide more than a reference to help you have a framework for how you configure the product and have a plan and start the process of adopting the software. So let's go on to exchange of equipment models. Feel free to jump in. I think Ralph is like reading our notes or something because he keeps posting about the next thing that we're going to talk about for the topics.
He does seem to be a bit clairvoyant that way.
Yeah. So this question is around equipment models. It's the survey question was around, do you get equipment models in other formats? And so this is just an idea of like, how much time do you spend throughout the process, throughout the project? You know, converting from different file formats or cleaning up equipment models. Kind of like to hear about what you guys do to get your equipment into a AutoCAD based model.
Yeah, and this is honestly one of those things where if you have a good workflow around this, it can be, you know, a really nice part of your system, or it can be just simply awful, and you're bringing in models that are highly detailed and cause your system to chug and slow down. So this is one of those topics that you initially bring it up and people will shrug, and then after they think about it for a little bit, they'll realize that, oh yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. So, you know, are you bringing things in via Inventor? Do you get SolidWorks models? What's your process there? Are you getting standard step files? So there's just tons to think about here, and we're all about, you know, improving that process for you and developing some tools on our end to help around that. So if you have questions or ideas or thoughts or pain points around that, jump into the chat window and get some questions in there. We're happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I know we did some work on a floor project, and they were getting in some just massive models. Some of them were skids, some of them were just regular vendor equipment, but they were just absolutely massive, and they couldn't even open up all of them. Like, they couldn't import them, and some of it was like the model itself was corrupt. Some of it was there was a bunch of nested stuff, or like in the conversion process, maybe AutoCAD would, what was it? There was like 1 or 2 blocks where AutoCAD would fail, and so it wouldn't be included in the ortho. And we ended up spending in, like a 40 megabyte model, and ended up spending like a day and a half trying to find the 2 little blocks that were, I think they ended up being meshes, and so the whole thing wasn't showing up in orthos or something like that. So finding those in a vendor model, you can ask the vendor to clean it up, but they're like, yeah, I gave you what I'm going to give you. Good luck. That type of thing. So you kind of get stuck with it. But I've been a fan of using the Inventor AnyCAD process and then getting those out. But yeah, we'd love to hear more about your equipment modeling.
Yeah, I think the Inventor shrink wrap functionality is just top shelf. You can bring in some really complicated stuff with all those internals, and the Inventor shrink wrap will just make that all go away.
It does. It is. Yep. So Ralph's comment was sometimes it's quicker to just model things simpler with your right nozzle locations than to try to bring the vendor stuff in. That's definitely true.
Yeah, I've absolutely had that in the past with complicated, or really not so much complicated, but equipment that they're like, oh, we don't really know exactly what it's going to look like, but we know that the nozzles are going to be here and it's going to be this big. So sometimes it's best to just kind of cartoon it in and make it look right, make the sizes, as long as you're getting your proper area there, and just kind of move on. So you can still have all of your information, all of your data, all your size, your speeds and things like that, but just to get it in there, get the space taken. So
yeah. Christopher, JJ, we haven't heard anything from you guys. If you'd like to chime in, we'd love to hear from you. I don't know if you have a mic or not. Well, you just have to you don't need a mic. You can just chat in there, and we'd love to hear from you and your experiences, or what your journey's been. And we're actually getting pretty close to wrapping this up. Let me see what our next slide is. Uh-oh. Dun, dun, dun. Revit is popping up everywhere. And yes, that is absolutely true. I know at AU, last year I did a Plant Expert Q&A. I think like a third of the questions were about Revit and how do you integrate with it. Again, this year, that's been a pretty big theme. And so we've had a lot of questions. We'd love to hear it if you guys have.
Yeah, it's been a very typical workflow through almost every industry I've worked with to have some interaction with architectural or building models. And Revit is the soup du jour as far as architectural design engines these days. So that workflow of integrating Plant 3D with Revit is something we're hearing about all the time, and we're very interested to hear what the level of interest in some solutions around that, or maybe it's just some education, but jump into the Q&A windows if you've got any thoughts around that subject. I guess the one thing to bring up along those lines is pipers, from my experience, and as we've mentioned previously, they're very good about having a Navisworks session up. And so integrating with nearly any other design application is pretty straightforward when you're running a Navisworks session. And that seems to change when you switch over to the AE fields, where the designers on the AE side, they don't use Navisworks. they're not looking for collisions that way, especially the Revit designers. They're very much of the school of thought that that model all needs to be in one environment. And so that's actually where we see a lot of the struggle is with the Revit users who are looking to have some exposure to the piping model rather than the other way around. But we have actually seen it the other way around too, where they really want that Revit model to be directly referenced right into their plant environment. It also bears mentioning too here that we've run into a number of clients who are using Revit structure, and Plant 3D has a very, very nice integration. Well, I shouldn't say very nice, but it's got a good integration with the advanced steel, where you can export out into the advanced steel model and do your detailing. But many times we're seeing clients actually do a lot of their structural design within Revit structure. So that's another workflow we're interested in hearing about. Well, if we don't have any questions on that, maybe we'll just jump over to our next slide and our next conversation topics. So this really gets to the heart of what this webinar is all about. Applied Software put this build webinar together so we could try to get some input from the users in the community to help us be a little more targeted in our efforts for 2020. So it sounds like the consensus is pretty much the whole spec creation process and spec maintenance process needs to be better. But is there anything else? Are there any specifics around how maybe you'd like to see that work? Perhaps, do we need to do plugins? Are there tools that need to be created? Or maybe it's just is it just additional content that's pre-configured? What would you like to see from Applied as we go into 2020 to help your P3D and P&ID processes go more smoothly?
I'd like to chime in on that if I can. Please feel free to email us. I've dropped the email down there. We really want to hear what you want us to cover on Plant 3D in 2020, just like Owen said. So let us know if you want to see a blog, a white paper. Just drop a message below or in our emails, and we'll be happy to create that. That's it. It's all about you guys.
Well, I was able to call back in. Sorry about that. Are we wrapping it up?
I think so. I'm not seeing any other questions. Owen, Caleb, what do you think?
There's Ralph has some comments around tweaks around gasketless butterflies, and we've heard those comments before that there are fitting makeup issues around components that don't require an additional gasket component.
Yeah, we've done we've created a custom connections for clients so that don't include a gasket. And that generally solves the problem.
Fabulous. It looks like, oh, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, again, I think that's, you know, the first person to the party is the one that has the most, you know, people see the most. So CADWorks got there and everyone's very familiar with how CADWorks does that. And now with Plant 3D being, you know, the second to show up, so to speak, we just have a little learning to overcome. And so it's not that these things aren't possible to do in the P3D spec creation tools. It's just some education needs to happen. And as Dave mentioned, those things are things that we've done in the past. So reach out to us if you have questions along those lines. We can definitely help.